All right. Well, hey, this is really exciting. I'm here today with an investor, just a really talented individual who's just awesome, has a lot to contribute in the way of economics and all sorts of great stuff. Tony, great to be with you today. Thanks for joining me on this Zoom.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for having me on. I think we've had some great conversations in the past, and I'm looking forward to this conversation and add value to the viewers' lives, and trying to help folks achieve more in their lives.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, what we're going to talk about is a little bit of Tony and his background with his investing and what he's been able to accomplish. And then if you see right behind Tony, there is a book that Tony shared with me when I first met him. I was generous enough to share it. I read the book, and it's an awesome book called Freedom at Risk. And so at the second part, I got the same thing right here. You did it more camera friendly. This is a great book. And so we're going to wrap up where Tony can share why he wrote the book, why it's a great resource, and why he is just a great mentor in this area. So let me give a little background on Tony. So Tony is a real estate professional. He's an author. He's a macroeconomic enthusiast, and he lives actually in two places. He lives in both Florida and New Hampshire and bounces between those two states. Here's something that's unique about Tony. He built a whole investment portfolio that allowed him to retire at age 44 with financial freedom. And, Tony, kudos to you on that. So many people, they get to their mid 60s and they're struggling. And yet in your early to mid 40s, you were able to have a portfolio that provided the cash flow to walk and be able to do what you're passionate about. So that's just awesome. What an accomplishment. Great to be with you. And the cool thing about Tony now is he coaches people and shows people how to invest in real estate and how to gain personal and economic freedom. So Tony, great to be with you. Let's start off talking a little bit about real estate. You were able to retire at age 44, which is huge. But when did you buy your first property, and kind of, just talk about that very first purchase? Because I find that's the one with a lot of people. We all want what you accomplished, but you got to start somewhere. So how did you buy your first property? What was it?
Yeah, so I'll absolutely share that backstory. But wow, you really built me up. I so appreciate you, Scott. And I'm no different than any of your viewers out there, right? Listening to or watching this. I'm just a regular guy, just an average Joe. And yeah, I got started by taking action, right? And that's really what it comes down to, is you just have to take some action. And so for me, my first property that I bought about 20 years ago, I was able to, I had originally, when I moved to New Hampshire, I bought a condo for myself to live in, and that had appreciated nicely over time. So that was where I had done a cash out refinance to come up with the down payment to be able to buy my first multifamily. And it was nothing pretty, let me tell you. This multifamily, it was a 4-unit, and not the best neighborhood, not the best quality of tenants, but it cash flowed, right? And that's key. And that's one of the things I coach folks on is, especially first timers, don't buy anything that's not going to be cash flowing for you on day one, because that's going to be your motivation for keeping up the pace of buying another and then another and then another. So it cash flowed, and I'll be honest with you, even though it wasn't the most beautiful property for me, I still have this property today. 20 years
Wow.
later, I'm still holding it. It's appreciated nicely. And it's cash flowing even more now for me today. But it's one of the things I share with folks with real estate is that in my first deal, there were a lot of mistakes. I could probably count easily on two hands. But even in the face of all those mistakes that I made on my first property, the benefits far outweighed any of those mistakes. So I want to share with the folks, yes, yeah, I can understand doing something new, investing in property. If you've never done it before, it can be very, very scary. I get that. Been there, done that. So I understand that perspective, that mindset, and that fear that you have. But use me as the case where even with all the mistakes I made, it was still tremendously positive for me at the end of the day.
That's interesting. And it's so true. I think we all learned that, right? We do some things right. We make a few mistakes. We try to make a few less mistakes next go around. So,
Yeah.
but let's go with the first property. You see, you picked a fourplex. What made you look at a 4 unit versus a single family duplex? Or, and did you have input doing that? Did you find it yourself? Did you work with a real estate professional? How did you start there getting into real estate?
Yeah, good question. Good question, Scott. Yeah, so I found it through through the MLS, through a real estate professional. I was working at the time. Um, and I just didn't have the bandwidth, the hours in the day to be looking online and be searching out properties and running numbers and right, like a lot of folks out there, we just don't have the time. Everybody's busy. So I delegated that to my real estate agent. He was great. He did a great job. He found this property. And for me, I wanted a fourplex because number one, I had enough of a nest egg to be able to invest in a fourplex. For some folks who maybe don't have that much of a nest egg today, especially with these high housing prices, maybe they just have enough of a nest egg for a duplex or for a single family. That's okay. Start there. That's perfectly fine. But for me, where I was that time in that place, I had enough for a fourplex. So that's the reason why I went with that property.
Awesome. Yeah, I know so many people grow their portfolio by adding units, adding doors and doing that. So the first one, you said it cash flowed. For everybody listening, Tony shared a great nugget.
Yeah.
Always make sure positive cash flow. If there's anything I tell you, some investors get in over their heads because they invest, or what I call almost gambling. They buy something hoping it'll go up. And if it has negative cash flow, sometimes you can't hang on to it through a downturn or through a change in the market. So pro investors, ones that are successful, they always buy with positive cash flow. And maybe it's a little bit, maybe it's a lot, but that's just a great tip.
Yeah.
So what did that first one look like? If you were to look at maybe your return, and I know it's 20 years ago, but something like cash on cash, or what it did for you, how did it do it when you first bought it? And then maybe share 20 years later, how's it doing for you today? Because I'm sure it's been significant in terms of improvement.
So I'll be completely honest with you, and this is maybe where I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, which maybe helped me or hurt me. But at the time, I didn't know anything about cash on cash. I did not make my determination based on that because I was new. I was uneducated on real estate investing. I just purely ran the numbers based on cash flow, and for me, I was looking for a couple of $100 per door, $200 to $300 per door, and I was good. So if I remember back, it was probably cash flowing somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a month. What was it doing cash on cash? I have no idea. I wasn't that sophisticated at the time. And again, this is where, you know, we can get so twisted around the numbers, and we can talk ourselves out of almost anything sometimes. And so this is why, I share with folks that, you have to take action. Don't invest in anything that doesn't cash flow. And the other thing with cash flow, when you invest in a property with cash flow, I go this through with coaching clients all the time. There's this concern, this fear of, well, Tony, what's going to happen to the market? Are the housing prices going to drop? Am I going to lose money? And from my perspective, it's like, if it's cash flowing, who cares what happens to the housing prices, right? If it goes down 20%, do you care? You still have a house that's cash flowing for you each and every month, and so that's a positive. So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Hey, it's a great insight. So what I'm hearing, if I were to summarize that, you jumped in, you got investment that made sense, that put dollars into your pocket, right? It was an asset in kind of pure, Kiyosaki terms, right? The money flowed to you
Yes.
and you evaluated that. And so what's interesting, sometimes people, you hear that analysis paralysis, people
Mm,
overanalyze and this and that. I kind of advocate the same thing, right? Buy a good deal. It doesn't need to be an A+ home run. As long as it's a decent purchase,
Yeah.
I tell you, my portfolio is made up of a lot of average properties, but stacked together, it creates a nice performing portfolio.
Yeah.
I've got some that perform better, some not as good. It doesn't really matter, get into the game and get something that cash flows. So let me ask you, you bought that in New Hampshire. Do you typically buy where you're located or do you buy out of state now?
So I- at the time I was heavily buying in New Hampshire
Okay.
primarily, but the rules of the game, almost to call it a game, the rules are changing. There's a lot of things happening in the world. I don't want to paralyze or stop people from buying real estate. But I think today there's more things to look at than when I started 20 years ago in real estate. Um, and so for me now, I am starting to buy more in the South, more in Florida, um, because the migration patterns support that. Plus, up here in the Northeast, we have a supply chain problem with energy, let's call it, whether it's LNG or oil or whatever. We have an issue there with supply chain for energy. And so what's going to happen is, as that gets built out, as that gets solved, energy here in the Northeast is just going to get more expensive for
Mhm.
tenants and for landlords. So when I look at things at a macro level, this is where the macroeconomics comes into play, what I've been studying for the last 5, 6 years now. When the macro of things comes into play, that's where I look at it and I say the Northeast is becoming more expensive from an energy perspective to heat your home, to cool your home, all of that. Plus, the migration patterns down to the south, the southern states, isn't in our favor in the Northeast as
Right.
well, right? So those are two big things between energy and migration patterns are not supporting my investments up here in the Northeast. So for example, that property, my first property that I purchased, I'm looking to do a 1031 exchange on that property. I have it for sale. There's a lot of benefits that, geez, when I bought it, I didn't even know it was zoned in a beautiful uh, zoning area where further development can take place. There's no density restrictions. So I could take that 4-unit property and build, a 10-unit property on
Mm.
that lot. There's no density requirements that prohibit me. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So when I sell, I will more than double my money on that property. And I'll just 1031 exchange that into another one, most likely in the South, Florida, Alabama, Texas, Arizona,
Okay.
maybe,
All right.
those areas.
So as time's gone on, you've expanded the scope of where you're investing, and now you look at things a little bigger than your backyard. You're looking at, hey, what trends will benefit me? So let me like fast forward up to 44, where you kind of retired off of that. So
Yeah,
what was kind of your decision to say, hey, I think I'm ready to actually retire? I started with one fourplex, I scaled and bought other assets. Were they all multifamily? First of all, were they all multifamily? Is that the niche that you kind of grew in? Okay.
correct.
Okay. What made you make the decision to, retire at 44, and how did you come about that whole decision, and how did real estate play into that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for again, I'm no different than a lot of folks. However, I was fortunate enough during my early career to realize that freedom was a huge value of mine. Freedom of time, freedom to do what I want, when I want, because I want. That whole freedom concept was huge to me. And so, like many folks, again, young folks growing up today's day and age, we to a great extent, we do what our parents tell us to do. And for mine, my parents told me, go to school, get a good job, and you'll be taken care of for the rest of your life. Right? That was kind of their mantra, and that was true back then. What they experienced. because there was loyalty there between employee and employer and vice versa. There was loyalty. Today, there's less loyalty. And so when I graduated college, I had followed that mantra. I went to school, got a great education, got a great job, and thought I was going to be taken care of for the rest of my life. But shortly after getting a job, I think it was 4 years later, I got laid off. And I was like,
Wow.
wait a minute, this wasn't part of the plan that my parents told me about. And so at that point, I realized the rules of the game have changed, and I needed to take more action, more control of my own life, of my own freedom. And so at that point, when I got laid off, I wasn't financially free. I needed to get another job, which took me about 3 months at the time, 3 months to find another job. How scary is that? Not
Right.
knowing where you were going to land. Uh, and so I landed another job. And at that point, I I realized freedom was big to me. And I realized I had to do something different to create um, separate cash flow for myself. And so that's where I started to think a little differently. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and started getting some amount of education to be able to start investing in real estate. And so shortly after I got another job, I started saving, did my refinance, bought my first multifamily, which was that 4 unit property. From there, I went into building a couple of spec homes because the
Hmm.
market was good. And so I started, and what I did was I had refinanced that 4 unit property that I had purchased. I pulled cash out of there to be able to start building a couple of new homes, sold those, and then ultimately reinvested that into buying more multifamilies, a
Okay.
duplex and then a triplex. And again, none of this is, hey, I didn't retire at 44 because I was making multi-million-dollar deals. I wasn't. I was buying a fourplex, I was buying a duplex, I bought a triplex, I bought, gosh, a 5 unit building. These weren't huge buildings, but they did have a lot of opportunity with them. So that's what I did, and I created some additional cash flow, and that's what allowed me to get to the point at 44 where I had to really decide, Scott, did I want to continue down the road of corporate America
Yeah.
and all that it brings with it brings with it, right? The
Right.
backstabbing and the not knowing if you're going to have a job and the loyalty that the company has to me. You know, there was a lot of uncertainty there. Or did I want to go down the route of just continuing with real estate and doing education? And so I decided real estate and education was a better fit for me. So that's why I retired at 44 and why I do what I do today.
That's awesome. I really like hearing how it was kind of you added up a bunch of little base hits, right?
Yeah.
Fourplex, triplex, sold off some homes, bought a, threeplex. So you bought properties that when we think of retiring, there's this, I think, misconception in a lot of people's minds that I've got to own massive amounts of real estate. I need to own a shopping center or a 100 unit apartment complex or
Yeah.
these and to the average American to do that, it seems like a daunting task. How do we go from nothing to these huge commercial properties? And yet, as I'm hearing you, you build a portfolio of a multifamily and another one and another little assets here and there, ones that everybody could probably save up and buy, right? I think most
Yeah.
people could buy a duplex in the Southeast. It's not that expensive. I've got several duplexes in my portfolio, I think four. The first one I bought was 140, and I think the most expensive was 250.
Yeah.
A lot of people could save up for assets like that and buy one and then save up and do it. I like that you did a refinance, right? So you use the asset, you harvested equity out and you redeployed it to buy more and more assets. And it sounds like you did that over and over. You let the asset go up in value, pulled equity, bought something else. That right there is a really powerful strategy. And so many people go, why do I do this real estate thing? It's buy one asset, refi it, go buy a couple more or buy more doors and do that a few different times. So that's awesome. And kudos to you being able to walk from corporate America and decide what you're more passionate about and then having the cash flow behind you from your properties to do that. That's quite
Yeah.
an accomplishment. So
And and
that's
and
awesome.
And I never, I never, stare down somebody who has a W-2, a job. I share with so many folks that having a job, use that to your credit, right? Having a job can be very beneficial for you to start in this in a couple of ways. One way is the fact that you have a job. When you go into a bank or a credit union, they're going to look at you a lot more positively than they look at me because I don't have a job, right? So they're kind of like, Tony, how do you make your money? And so they're skeptical about what I do. Whereas you have a job, you have a steady paycheck each and every week that they're going to look at in a very favorable way. And especially if you've been with your employer for a certain number of years, man, you go right to the top of their pile. So being able to get a bank loan or go to a credit union and get a loan, you look excellent in their eyes for the most part, assuming you don't have any other credit risks. So that's one thing that is a great thing if you have a job to be able to get a loan. The other thing, if you have a job, chances are you also have a 401k. And with a 401k, if you've been at your job for a certain amount of time, you probably have a pretty decent amount in your 401k. And most 401ks do allow you to borrow against that 401k. Now, I'm not advertising this as it's the way to go for everyone. I'm just sharing with folks, if you need a down payment to purchase a single family or a duplex and you don't have that down payment nugget today, the 401k that you have, you may be able to borrow against that to be able to create your down payment. And at the end of the day, when you're paying back your 401k loan, you're paying yourself back. You're not
Right.
paying the company, you're not paying anyone. You're putting that money back into your own account each and every month. So that's one strategy I share with folks. Again, I'm not advertising it as something everybody should go raid their 401k. That's not what I'm advertising. You have to look at the numbers. You got to look at the deal. You got to look at what your 401k charges you for an interest rate. There's a lot of factors, but there's opportunity there to leverage if you have a job to leverage those two things. And man, let me tell you, you'd look a lot better to the bank than I do. So
That's both of those are great concepts, right? The advantage of a job, use it to your advantage. And number two, if you've been saving up in one of those qualified plans, I did that. I borrowed against a 401k,
yeah.
paid cash for an asset years ago, and then paid it back. So I'm paying myself back, but I have an asset appreciating that's working for me. So let me switch gears a little bit with you because you've been doing this for a while. I want to ask you a couple questions just to glean some wisdom. One would be, what was probably the number one or the biggest mistake you've made so far in investing? So as a new investor, what was the biggest mistake? And then the flip side would be, what advice would you give to that first time investor that wants to get into real estate, wants to scale and grow and build passive income? What would be your biggest nugget? So if you could
Mm,
expand on those two things, that'd be
sure.
awesome, because it's a privilege to be able to talk to a seasoned investor that's been around through a couple decades, right? You've done it yourself and you've got that wisdom to share. So share on those two things if you could.
Sure. So I always say my biggest mistake was being too involved in my properties. Um, and I didn't have an appreciation for where I really excelled in terms of real estate investing. I thought, and what I did was I bought a property. I went there, I cut the grass, I fixed the window, I, unclogged the toilet, I, painted the apartment. That was me. And that's not where I should have been focusing, right? That was not my sweet spot. That was all stuff I could have paid somebody, at the time, 10, $20 an hour to go do. And
Right.
that's what should have happened. I spent way too much time doing low level tasks. I was much better at analyzing numbers, analyzing the deal, basically doing the what we call underwriting to see if a property is going to cash flow or not. That's my biggest mistake. I should have spent more time there finding deals, analyzing deals, and making offers. Instead, I was mowing lawns and unclogging toilets. So
So
know where your value is when you buy a property you know, it,
Yeah.
it, it might be doing the property maintenance. It maybe, but chances are if you're even looking at this, I doubt it. I
Well,
doubt
Tony, just to speak to that, my first property I bought, which was 20 some years ago, was a fourplex in Colorado Springs. I did the exact same thing. I screened the tenants, I painted, I did it all that. And for me, and this, this is a mistake I made. It was too much. I'm better at numbers and
Yeah,
buying assets and scaling. I'm not a good handyman guy. I don't like it. I suck at it. So
yeah,
I ended up selling that asset. That property now in 20 years has more than tripled in value.
yeah.
So I
Nice.
would have had the loan almost paid off.
Yeah,
And I got rid of an asset because of doing everything you did. And I said, I didn't sign up for a second job. I had a full-time job. And yet I was babysitting my property and self-managing it. And it was a lot of work. So, good job on your end being able to do that and hang on. I did the other thing and unloaded it. I said, oh, I can't do this. So anyway,
yeah,
I made the same mistake, but it was such a big mistake that I walked. And now I didn't get any of the cash flow from that asset. I didn't get any of the appreciation. And I think I probably broke even, bought it and
yeah.
sold it and broke even. So that anyway, I've been in your exact shoes.
No, and again, I don't want to shy folks away from doing a certain amount of property management or maintenance. And I'm sure we'll double back to this. I'll give you an example why. So some folks just don't have the equity to put down that down payment. Some folks don't, and
Right.
that's okay. But they might know somebody who does have that equity, right? And so I use the example of, the white collar lawyer who probably has the equity, but doesn't have the time or the patience to deal with a property yet knows he or she wants to be in real estate. And so maybe that's your neighbor, maybe that's your brother-in-law or your sister-in-law or whoever it is that lawyer type person with the equity for the down payment. Yet you or I may have the property maintenance and management skills. And so maybe we partner together in an LLC, right? 50-50 partnership where one person, that white collar, so to speak, brings the equity for the down payment, and I bring the property maintenance and management piece. I find the tenants, I mow the lawn, right? And so that's a way, if you don't have the down payment, that's the way you can partner with somebody through a legal structure, an LLC, to be able to get into real estate yourself. You split the cash flow, you split the equity if you do a refi, or you just wrap those rules, those expectations around the contract. So I just want to share that nugget. I don't want folks to walk away saying, oh geez, I don't have money and I don't want to, they're telling me not to do property management or maintenance, right? So I just wanted to share that concept, just, hopefully help some folks think it through.
No, that's a great perspective, right? If you want to get into real estate, everybody's got something they bring. Some people bring the capital, some people bring the deal, some people bring that day-to-day management or babysitting the asset. So find where you're good. And then if you want to get in, find other people that have the other components, partner together. So many people get going by buying properties jointly to get the ball rolling on that. So Tony, what would you put what's the biggest piece of advice you would say to a new real estate investor? They're dipping their toe in the water.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most important insight that you picked up, or insight or two,
So for me, out of personal experience, it's just finding a mentor out there that can help you. I had one in my start. It's so funny. I always looked up to him and said, wow, his name is Steve. And I said, wow, he has so many properties, so many doors, he's doing well. And, I always looked up to him. And actually today I have more doors than he does. And I don't say that from a braggadocious standpoint. I certainly don't. I admire and I respect this man to this day, but find somebody in your local community or find a coach, find a mentor that can help you through this. It's so much easier walking through something you haven't done before, walking through it with somebody who has. It's kind of like a gym buddy. Getting up to go to the gym at 5 a.m. is hard. But if you have a buddy on the other side that's going to be meeting you there, that you don't want to let down, that you're going to have to spot, whatever it is, you show up. And this is no different instead of going to a gym, you're meeting up for a cup of coffee and speaking with your mentor or your coach.
Hey, that's what a great tip. I think if you don't do it alone and you've got somebody, it's just a few steps. I think sometimes we think a mentor, you think of personal development, a guy like Tony Robbins. Well,
Yeah.
you don't need somebody that's a superstar. You just need somebody that that's local, that's a little farther along than you, and
Yeah.
you can just draft off of them, right? And I find, especially in real estate, everybody's so helpful. We're all involved in different communities of people that help each other out and share insights. And I find that particularly in the real estate niche, people love to share their expertise and see other people passionate to get going, because buying a portfolio of real estate can change your life. What it does for you in terms of cash flow and net worth, it's a life changer. And
Yeah.
so other people want to help. So I think that's a great one. And today, back then, 20 years ago, it was one-on-one and coffee. Of communities online, right? You've got local investment groups. It's pretty easy to find other investors, either in person or online, or a combination of those. So
Yeah.
that's a great tip. So what I want to do, I want to switch gears. You've done all this personally, and you brought this book out. You wrote this book. You put it together. Let's kind of talk about it. So the full title is Freedom at Risk: How to Protect Your Personal and Financial Freedoms, which I think is great that you link those two together. It's not one or the other, but it's both of them. Why did you write this book, Tony? What inspired you, and kind of what went into writing a book?
So I started researching a lot of things, macroeconomic, and just a lot of things about 5 years ago. I started, and things that were supposed to work a certain way, or historically have worked a certain way in our system, uh, weren't working that same way. And I said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so the more I learned and researched, the more I said, holy cow, the rules have changed. The world is a very different place than it used to be. And so for me, I don't have kids, but I do have a niece and nephews. And I said, so they're getting older now. And I said, I know they're not learning this in school and college or anything like that. Nobody's teaching them this. So I said, funny enough, this was only supposed to be a white paper. I figured 20, 30, 40 pages. I'm just going to go, bang this out on my keyboard and at least give them some sort of a roadmap
Hmm.
to help guide them in their quest for freedom, whether it's personal or financial or both. I wanted to help them see this through. So I, maybe innocently enough, I started writing this so-called white paper, and before I knew it, I was at like 35,000 words. And I said, this isn't a white paper anymore. This is a book. So the genesis of the book really does come from the heart. I originally started this to help my family, which obviously I love. And so anybody who reads the book is going to get all that goodness, all that love that I put into it, really to help my family. They're gonna get all that value, all that love through the book.
Wow. Wow. What a great way to start it. So you started, it was about 5 years. Is that what you put into it all in?
Yeah.
That's a lot of time and research. That's one of the things that I thought was interesting when I went through the book, is you pull in data from different quadrants, right? So you talk about a lot of different aspects. It's not just in one niche. So you built wealth in real estate, but the book is much broader than that. So it's broken into sections. You want
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about each section and kind of
Sure.
how it builds upon it, and then where you kind of conclude how that all comes together?
Yeah, so a little bit about the title, Freedom at Risk. So that's a little grabby, right? That's a little bit of an eye catcher there. But that subtitle, How To, right? This is a how-to book in terms of protecting your personal and financial freedom. And throughout the book, I worked with two separate editors to work through the book and make sure that we spread not doom and gloom, we spread hope and opportunity throughout this book. So I don't want folks to think it's a doom and gloom read. It's very much about creating hope and opportunity for yourself. So a lot of times when I started these conversation with folks, it was, they would share with me, Tony, don't worry. After a Democrat leaves the White House, we'll have a Republican and everything will go back to normal, so-called normal. And, I kept having these repetitive conversations. And I said, no, that's not the case. There's so many more things acting against us in the world. And so that's why the first part of the book, I broke it down into 5 chapters where I speak about how, politics is stealing our freedoms. The education system is stealing our freedoms. The economy steals our freedoms. Society itself, we ourselves steal our freedoms. And then monetary policy steals our freedoms. So I walk through that in 5 easy chapters just to share some different perspectives, some different education with the reader, how that is all stealing our freedom. So it's not just whether there's a D or an R in the White House. There's so much more to that. Once they understand that, we move on to part 2 of the book, which explains the how to protect your personal freedoms. And I explained that in 1 chapter, personal freedoms, some different things you can do. Like, for us, we're big on community and we're big on having our own garden, right? That has nothing to do with financial freedom, but it does have to do with personal freedom. We love having our garden. We just planted, I don't know how many potato plants, but we're going to harvest between 300 and 400 potatoes this year out of our garden, right? And we have many more things in there. So that gives us some personal freedom, knowing where our food is coming from, right?
Yeah.
No pesticides, and we can do this and know that we can do this and we can expand and do more. So there's a lot of things I give in that personal freedom chapter that anybody can do, and I break it out in an a la carte fashion. Whereas if you don't resonate with a garden, there's other things in there in that chapter that you may resonate with, and go take action on that. And then the
Right.
same thing with the chapter on financial freedom. Obviously, we create a lot of personal freedom through financial freedom. So there is that. But with financial freedom, again, there's a lot of different things. Real estate is just one of them. I'm not advocating, this is not a book about real estate. I'm not looking to create a whole bunch of Tonys out there or a whole bunch of Scotts out there. If they gravitate towards real estate, great. If not, there's a whole bunch of other a la carte items to talk about financial freedom. And maybe you resonate more with asymmetric plays, crypto, or maybe you resonate more with dividend producing stocks, things like that, right? There's a lot of different things that you can see on that a la carte package to, maybe select 1 or 2 to start your path.
So what I'm hearing you say, there's not just one path to financial freedom. Is that what you're saying, loud and clear?
Correct.
There are a lot of different ways, or you could pick one strategy, or you can combine a couple strategies. It's interesting you brought up the potatoes in the garden. I just read somebody who's actually ripping up their entire yard. How they happen to be in Florida, and they're redoing their whole yard to make it an edible yard. So they're actually planting fruit producing trees around the edge, the perimeter, but the entire landscape is going to be converted into food. I was like, wow, I never thought of that. And so that's a really great point. A lot of people own their homes and they've got a yard. And so maybe that's a way just to get, you almost get several benefits from that. You get great quality food without chemicals, probably better tasting than you're going to buy from the store where maybe it's been
Yeah.
sitting around somewhere for months, so the quality is better. It's better for you and you control it. And it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I'm a plant junkie myself. It's kind of fun to watch stuff grow. Right. And then you get the final part where you get to enjoy it. So
Yeah.
that's interesting about something that's very tangible. And,
Yeah.
gosh, almost everybody can start
And it's
a
not
little flip right.
expensive.
Right.
It's not expensive to start, right?
Yeah.
Go to the
No.
store, buy a package of seeds for $2 and you're
Right.
and you're starting.
So what I hear you saying is, what, you don't necessarily have to do this massive change. You can just do a little step down a path in an area that leads you to a better outcome 20 years down the road. So, and I didn't mean to circle back to that. So you were talking about the next section of the book has a lot of different ways to, on the financial side, there are different ways to accomplish that. Go on and talk a little bit more about what else is in the book, because it's a great read, and that's why I'm just tickled to have you on here, Tony. That was how we first met, was you handing me a book and us having a discussion, and I think there's so much value in it that I think exposing it to more and more people and doing that's great. So talk a little bit more about the book. Where does it go from there?
Yeah, so on just a little bit more about the financial freedom aspect. You know, a concept that you shared with me as we were talking through things at one of these events that we met up at. You know, it's basically, you know, if you have a one-legged stool, it is very unsafe. And what we do is we work to put more legs on that stool, right? If we have a three-legged stool, it's a much more safe stool to sit on, to stand on. And so that's what we look to do with the financial piece, right? So if you have a W-2 job, I'm not looking for anybody to quit their W-2 job and jump into real estate, right? Real estate is just a second leg on that stool, right? Now you have two legs. Now let's look, and it doesn't have to be immediate, right? Like you were saying, Scott, none of this is like you have to do like all at once, right? Maybe add real estate this year. Next year, maybe add a second leg of dividend producing stocks, right? Maybe after that, maybe you dip your toe into the asymmetric play of crypto investing. Maybe. I don't know if that's your thing, right? I'm not you know, saying you have to do any one of these things, but it's basically building additional legs onto that stool so you have more security, more safety, more freedom in your life.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, just out of curiosity, do you know how many streams of income the average millionaire has, Tony?
The average millionaire,
Yeah.
um, the average millionaire, I don't. I could guess, but I don't know.
So the data is they have on average a minimum of 7 different streams of income. So you look at your stool with 3, a millionaire. And so if we want to become financially successful, it's a really good idea to study those that are already. And so the concept that I see is, and you were just saying it, get a second stream. There's your second leg. Get a third, get a fourth. And they don't have to be big, but combined together, that can be something. So, it just hit me when you talk about financial freedom and retiring. What for you is the metric? What is that? Do you have a benchmark to be able to be financially free? What does that look like? Or if you were to summarize it, what is financial freedom for you?
You can look at it in terms of an equation. You need to have as much income coming in as you do your monthly expenses, right? So if your monthly expenses between your mortgage, your property insurance, your food, your gas, your car payment, whatever it is, you total up all your expenses. And if your expenses are, you know, $3,000 a month, then your income coming in needs to be $3,000, right? And so now it's balanced. Now to achieve that freedom, you know, freedom means different things to different people. And for me, freedom is freedom of time to be able to go off and do the things I love and I enjoy. So for me, I don't want to be having somebody pay me for my time. I want to be making that $3,000 in the form of, so to speak, residuals, cash flowing property or residuals, you know, whether it be my book or some of the other activities that I do. I would rather have it be from those residuals where I'm making money while I sleep, so to speak.
Right.
And that gives me the freedom of time. But basically just looking at that equation and with a lot of the folks that I coach, we sometimes start there to help them understand, you know, how do you get to financial freedom? And we take a look at what they have for expenses, and we say, okay, so we have to get to 3 properties or 10 doors. How do we do that? Okay, let's start.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just wanted to explain that. Sometimes when people think of financial freedom, it's, having massive amounts of money and a net worth with a bunch of zeros, associated with it. And yet, if you boil it down, if you've got passive income, residual income coming in that's above and beyond your expenses, you've kind of covered your nut, so to speak, and you don't have to put time into a job, but you've got enough passive income. And a lot of people, I think, are surprised to realize, hey, if I really look at my bare expenses, right? Mortgage, car payment, food, whatever it costs, medical, if that's what I'm aiming for, it might be something like 4 or 5 thousand bucks a month. It doesn't require a net worth of millions of dollars to hit that. So thanks for making it approachable and
Yeah.
accessible on that end. And by the way, it's so you also now you wrote a book. You mentioned coaching people. So let's talk about 2 things. Number one, This is a great book. It's a paperback, which I like, a little bit cheaper than a hardback.
Yeah.
So you can get all the information.
Yeah.
If people want to get this book, and I highly, highly recommend it, Tony is a great guy, a wealth of information, and this is a great book. Tony, where can people get it? What's the best way for them to actually get the book from you and track it down?
Uh, it, they can obviously go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com if they have signed up for that, or they can just email me directly. I typically ship the book out cheaper than Amazon or Barnes and Noble, so I can give them a better rate on the book. So they can just email me directly at my email address, which is Tony Lopes, Lopes with an S, Tony Lopes at dirtybootscapital.com.
Got it. So email you is a way to get it at a better rate and do that. And so what, by the way, where'd you come up with that name? What is Dirty Boots Capital all about? Just share that.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Yeah, so it was a very creative design of the name. I grew up in a very blue collar family. My dad was a construction worker. My mom worked in a factory sewing curtains and clothes and things like that. So I was not born into a wealthy family. My dad also got started in real estate. He had a couple of units himself. And so working in construction, doing the real estate thing, he always came home with his boots dirty. And so my mom would always say, hey, leave your boots at the door. Don't traipse through my nice, clean living room. You can imagine how those conversations went. So for me, dirty boots, is kind of ingrained from that beginning of me also getting my boots dirty, starting in real estate. But I explained to folks, doing real estate is not just about getting your boots dirty in the field of walking through, say, a construction site or a land deal or a remodel, things like that, a flip. It's not just about getting your boots dirty there. It's about getting your boots dirty, walking through financial statements, demographic reports, understanding more of the environment that you're investing in from a financial and a demographic standpoint for, as a couple of examples. So you got to get your boots dirty in multiple different ways. And then capital, a lot of folks think about, capital in terms of money. And it is, yeah, capital is, money. But I try to share with folks, capital is much more than that. We all carry capital with us, capital in terms of, the different value that we bring to a deal. We spoke earlier about somebody who may not have capital in the form of money, but they have capital in the form of they know how to fix things. They're very good at managing people, managing tenants. So their capital may be in the form of, having good relationships with people or being able to do property maintenance, right? That's their capital. So that's where I share with folks, let's, try to expand the way we think of some of these things, both from a dirty boots perspective. It's more than just looking at the property itself. You got to look at demographics. You got to look at the financials of things, understand that. You got to look at taxation. You got to look at exit strategies. There's a whole bunch of different things we can look at. But then also the capital side of it, it's much more than money. We all bring a lot to the table. And I don't want to disqualify anybody from getting into real estate. We just got to be sometimes a little creative and open to some new ideas in terms of how we think about our capital.
Oh, that's great. Hey, and what a really great explanation. I didn't know the meaning behind that. It's cool to hear that how you kind of honored your family heritage and kind of what you grew up with. And I love how now you've looked at it from a bigger perspective. It's just great. Tony, you're smart, you're wise, you're successful, but you're humble. And it's just great to visit with you, get some of these nuggets and just listen. So again, you guys, if you want to get this book, which I highly recommend, Tony Lopes with an S at dirtybootscapital.com. You can get the best pricing there. And then Tony also does, things where he does coaching and shares his expertise. So may or may not be a fit, but if that's something listening to him that might be good for you, reach out. I know he responds to his emails personally and does that. Tony, anything you want to kind of wrap up with today?
No, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on, Scott. And I encourage folks to to take action, right? Reach out to Scott. If you resonate with Scott, reach out to Scott. He can help you. If you resonate with me, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you. Just take action. Some little piece, some little bit, just start. I swear it's not as scary as you think it is.
Great. What a great nugget to leave off on. I can, what is it? Success, Ben Franklin said, is 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration, right? So get into the game, take action, doing something and get moving. A moving ship can always be steered. So Tony, it's been an honor, privilege to visit with you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to visit. And I'll be sure to put in the notes also how people can get in touch with you and get the book. Thank you very much. This has been a blast and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you.